Describe, using diagrams where appropriate, the exact circumstances leading to your death. Saunders had been dead for almost 2 weeks now, and so far he hadn't enjoyed a minute of it. What he wasn't enjoying at this particular moment was having to wade through the morass of forms and legal papers he'd been sent to complete by the Department of Death and Deceased Rights. It was all very well being sent a 5-page booklet entitled Your Own Death and How to Cope with It. It was all very well attending counseling sessions with the ship's metaphysical psychiatrist and being told about the nature of being and non-being, and some other gunk about this guy who was in a cave but didn't know it was a cave until he left. The thing was, Saunders was an engineer, not a philosopher, and the way he saw it, you were either dead or you were alive. And if you were dead, you shouldn't be forced to fill in endless, incomprehensible forms and other related nonsensica. You shouldn't have to return your birth certificate to have it invalidated. You shouldn't have to send off your completed death certificate, accompanied by a passport-size photograph of your corpse signed on the back by your coroner. When you're dead, you should be dead. The bastard should leave you alone. If Saunders could have picked something up, he would have picked something up and hurled it across the grey metal room. But he couldn't. Saunders was a hologram. He was just a computer-generated simulation of his former self, and couldn't actually touch anything, except for his own hologrammatic body. He was a phantom made of light, a software ghost. Quite honestly, he'd had enough. Saunders got up, walked silently across the metal-grilled floor of his sleeping quarters, and stared out of the viewport window. Far away to his right was the bright, multicolored ball of Saturn, captured by its rainbow rings, like a prize in a gigantic stellar hoopla game. 12 miles below him, under the plexiglass dome of the terraformed colony of Mimas, half the ship's crew were on planet leave. No planet leave for Saunders. No R&R for the dead. He caressed his eyelids with the rough balls of his fingers, then glanced back at the pile. The mind-bogglingly complicated hologrammatic status application form, accident claims, pension funds, bank transfers, house deeds. They all had to be completed so his wife, Carol, no, his widow, Carol, could start a new life without him. When he'd first signed up, they both understood he would be away from Earth for months on end, and obviously things could happen. Mining in space was dangerous. That was why the money was so good. "If anything happens to me," he'd always said, "I don't want you to sit around mourning." Protests. "I want you to meet someone else, someone terrific, and start a new life without me." What a stupid, fat, dumb thing to say. The kind of stupid, fat, dumb thing only a living person would ever dream of saying. Because that's what she was going to do now. Start a new life, without him. Fine, if he was dead. If he'd just taken delivery of his shiny new ephemeral body and was wafting around in the ether on the next plane of existence, fine. Even if there was no life after death and he totally ceased to be, then again, absolutely fine. But this was different. He was dead, but he was still here. His personality had been stored on disk, and the computer had reproduced him down to the tiniest detail, down to his innermost thoughts. This was not the deal. He wanted her to start a new life when he was gone, not while he was still here. But of course, that's what she'd do. That's what she had to do. You can't stay married to a dead man. So even though she loved him dearly, she would, eventually, have to start looking for someone else. And she would sleep with them. She would go to bed with them. And hell, she would probably enjoy it. Even though she still loved him. She would, wouldn't she? She would meet Mr. Terrific and have a physical relationship, probably in his bed. His bed! Their marital bed! His bed! Probably using the 3 condoms he knew for a fact he had left in the bedside cabinet. The ones he'd bought for a joke, the flavoured ones. His mind ran amok, picturing a line of lovers standing strawberry-sheathed outside his wife's bedroom. "No!" screamed Saunders involuntarily. "No!" Hologrammatic tears of rage and frustration welled up in Saunders' eyes and rolled hologrammatically down his cheeks. He smashed his fist down on the table. The fist passed soundlessly through the grey metal desktop and crashed with astonishing force into his testicles. As he lay in a fetal position, squealing on the floor, he wished he were dead. Then he remembered. He already was. Saunders didn't know it, but 12 below, on the Saturnian moon of Mimas, Flight Coordinator George McIntyre was about to solve all his problems. George McIntyre sat in the Salvador Dali coffee lounge of the Mimas Hilton and stared at a painting of melting clocks while he waited for the tall, immaculately dressed mechanoid to return with his double Bloody Mary, no ice. He couldn't stand Bloody Mary without ice, but he didn't want his shaking hand to set the cubes clanking around in the glass and advertise his nervousness when his visitors arrived. 5 minutes later, they did arrive, and McIntyre wished they hadn't. When he turned and caught sight of them, the heat left his body as quickly as people leave a Broadway first-night party when the bad reviews come in. There were 3 of them, big men. They each had the kind of build that looks stupid in a suit. Shoulders tiered from the neck, thighs like rolls of carpet, biceps and triceps screaming to be released from the fetters of the finely tailored lounge suits. The kind of bodies that only look right and natural in posing pouches. In suits, no matter how expensive, and these were expensive, they looked like kids who'd been forced into their Sunday best, all starched and itching. McIntyre couldn't shake the feeling that they were yearning, aching to get nude and start oiling up. They didn't say hello and sat down at his table. One of them took up both spaces on the pink sofa, while the other 2 drew up chairs from a nearby table and squeezed into them. The armrests were forced out into a tired V to the accompaniment of an uneasy creaking sound. McIntyre just sat there, smiling. He felt as if he was sitting in the middle of a huge barrel of sweating muscle. He was convinced that if he shook hands with any of the 3, he would immediately die from an overdose of steroid poisoning. He wondered, though not too hard, why one of them was carrying a pair of industrial bolt clippers. The tall, immaculately dressed mechanoid came up and served McIntyre his Bloody Mary. All 3 of the men ordered decaf coffee. While they waited for it to arrive, they chatted with McIntyre. Small talk. Difficulties parking, the decor, the irritating muzak. When the coffee came, McIntyre pretended not to notice that they couldn't get their fingers through the cup handles. The man on the sofa lifted up a briefcase and fiddled clumsily with the lock. For a moment, McIntyre found himself feeling sorry for the man. Everything was too small for him, the briefcase, the coffee cup, the suit. Then he remembered the bolt clippers and stopped feeling sorry for the man, and started feeling sorry for himself again. The case eventually sprang open, and the man took out a fold-out 3-page document and handed it to McIntyre with a pen. McIntyre explained, apologetically, that it was impossible for him to sign the document. The 3 men were upset. George McIntyre left the Salvador Dali coffee lounge of the Mimas Hilton carrying his nose in a Mimas Hilton coffee lounge napkin. The 4 Astros paid the fare, leaving the smallest of small tips, and staggered through the jabbering crowd and up the steps into the Los Americanos casino. Lister flicked on the For Hire sign and decided to take the hopper down Central and back towards Mimas Docks. He slipped the gear into jump and braced himself. The hopper leapt into the air and landed with a spine-juddering crunch 200 yards down Eastern Avenue. The hopper's rear legs retracted into the engine housing, then hammered into the ground, propelling him another 200 yards. As it smacked into the tar-macadammed 3-lane highway, Lister's neck was forced into the hollow at the base of his skull, further aggravating an already angry headache. The hopper's suspension was completely shot to hell. Lister began to wish he'd never stolen it. Hoppers had been introduced to Mimas 30 years previously to combat the ludicrous congestion which had blocked the small moon's road system so badly that an average Mimean traffic jam could last anything up to 3 weeks. People had been known to die of starvation in particularly bad ones. Hoppers, which could leapfrog over obstructions and spend most of their time in the air, helped ease the problem. True, there were a fair number of mid-air collisions, and there was always the possibility of being landed on by a drunk-driven hopper, but by and large, you reached your destination in the same season you set off. Lister watched with envy as another hopper overtook him with the easy grace of a frolicking deer. The next landing was the worst. The hopper hit a metal drain cover with such violence, Lister bit his cigarette in half, and the glowing tip fell between his thighs and rolled under the seat of his pants. Frantically he arched his body out of the seat and tried to sweep the butt onto the floor as the hopper leapt madly down the busy highway like a sick metallic kangaroo. Something was burning. It smelt like hair. And since he was the only thing in the hopper that had hair, it was fairly safe to assume some part of him was on fire. Some part of him that had hair. He liked all the parts of him that had hair. They were his favourite bits. His eyes searched desperately for a place to park. Forget it. In London, people parked wherever it was possible. In Paris, people parked even where it wasn't possible. On Mimas, people parked on top of the people who'd parked where it wasn't possible. Stacks of hoppers, 3, sometimes 4 high, lined the avenue on both sides. A typical Saturday night on Mimas. The thick air hung heavy with the smells and noise of 100 mingling cultures. The trotters, Mimean slang for pavements, were obscured by giant serpents of human flesh as people wrestled their way past the blinking neons of casinos and restaurants, the on-off glare of bars and clubs, shouting, screaming, laughing, vomiting. Astros and miners on planet leave going wallet-bulging crazy, desperate for a good time after months of being incarcerated in the giant space freighters that now hung over the moon's shuttleport. The Earth had long been purged of all its valuable mineral resources. Humankind had emptied its home planet like an enema, then turned its rapacious appetite to the rest of the solar system. The Spanish-owned Saturnian satellite of Mimas was a supply center and stop-off point for the thousands of mining vessels which plundered the smaller planets and the larger moons and asteroids. Smoke began to plume from between Lister's legs. Still nowhere to park. Traffic blared and leapfrogged over him as he skewed across lanes, fighting to keep control. In desperation, he grabbed the thermos flask lying on the passenger seat, struggled with the unfamiliar cap, and poured the contents into his smouldering lap. A hiss signaled the end of the cigarette. There was a second of delicious relief. Then he smelt coffee. Hot coffee. Piping hot coffee. Piping hot coffee that covered his loins. The pain had already hit him by the time he poured the bottle of upholstery cleaner he found in the glove compartment over his thighs. The hopper, now madly out of control, caroomed off the Mutual Life Assurance building, taking a large chunk out of the neon sign before Lister wrestled it back under control, and still, whimpering in pain, headed towards the docks. The man in the navy blue officer's coat and the blatantly false moustache flagged down Lister's hopper and got in. 152nd and 3rd, he said curtly, and pressed the tash, which was hanging down on the right-hand side, back into place. Going to a brothel? Asked Lister amiably. Absolutely not, said the man in the blue officer's coat. I am an officer of the Space Corps. He tapped the gold bars on his lapel. And I do not frequent brothels. I just thought, what with 152nd and 3rd being slap bang in the middle of the red light area. Well, you're not paid to think, you're paid to drive. Lister flicked on the hired sign, slipped the hopper into jump, and bounced off to the district the locals affectionately called Shagtown. On the first landing, the officer's moustache was almost jolted clear of his face. What the smeg's wrong with the suspense? His head disappeared into the soft felting of the cab's roof. Shun! He bounced back down into the seat. It's the roads, Lister lied. They stopped at a blue light. At right angles to them, 30 hoppers sprang forward like a herd of erratic gazelles being pursued by a pack of wolves. What's it like? What's what like? Said the man, feeling his jaw, convinced a tooth had been loosened in the last landing. Being in the Space Corps, being an astro, I was sort of thinking of signing up.
Were you really?
Contempt. Do you need any qualifications?
Well, not exactly, but they don't just accept any old body. I doubt whether you'd get in.
Lister felt for the fare enhancer button he'd found concealed under the dashboard of the taxi and added a few dollar pounds onto the fare. The lights changed, and they lurched off, conversation impossible. Lister had been trying to get off Mimas now for nearly 6 months. How he'd got there was still something of a mystery. The last thing he really remembered with any decent clarity was celebrating his birthday back on Earth. He and 6 of his very closest friends decided to usher in his 24th year by going on a Monopoly board pub crawl around London. They'd hitched a ride in a frozen meat truck from Liverpool and arrived at lunchtime in the Old Kent Road. A drink at each of the squares was the plan. They started with hot toddies to revive them from the ride. In Whitechapel they had pina coladas. King's Cross Station, double vodkas. In Euston Road, pints of Guinness. The Angel Islington, mezcals. Pentonville Road, bitter laced with rum and blackcurrant. And so they continued around the board. By the time they'd got to Oxford Street, only 4 of them remained. And only 2 of the 4 still had the power of speech. His last real memory was telling the others he was going to buy a Monopoly board because no one could remember what the next square was, and stepping out into the cold night air clutching 2/3 of a bottle of sake. There was a vague, very vague, poorly lit memory of an advert on the back of a cab seat, something about cheap space travel on Virgin's new batch of demi-light-speed zippers, something about Saturn being in the heart of the solar system and businesses were uprooting all the time, something about it being nearer than you think at half the speed of light, something about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and then a thick, black, gunky fog. He woke up slumped across a table in a McDonald's burger bar on Mimas, wearing a lady's pink crimpline hat and a pair of yellow fishing waders, with no money and a passport in the name of Emily Birkenstein. What was more, he had a worrying rash. He was broke, diseased, and 793 million miles from Liverpool. When Lister got drunk, he really got drunk. He brought the hopper to a crunching halt on the corner of 152nd and 3rd, outside a garish neon sign promising girls, 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 and sex, sex, sex.
I understand,
said the man in the navy blue officer's coat, surreptitiously regluing his moustache.
There are some excellent restaurants in this area, offering authentic Mimean cuisine.
Look, said Lister, as he short-changed the officer, do you want me to pick you up? He really didn't feel like cruising around in the bone-juddering hopper for another fare. I don't mind waiting. The officer glanced down the street at the various pimpy types with poorly concealed weaponry under their coats.
Fine. Wait round the corner.
How long will you be?
Well, I'm led to believe the Mimean bladderfish is particularly exquisite, and I would be insane if I didn't at least try the legendary inky squid soup. Plus, of course, pudding, brandy, and cigars. Say, 10 minutes? Call it 20 to be on the safe side.
Lister took the hopper round the corner and saw his fare stride purposefully towards a Mimeanese restaurant, pause outside, studying the menu, and then turn and walk straight into the building with the neon sign boasting girls, 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 and sex, sex, sex. Lister locked the door of the hopper. He wasn't totally crazy about this area, safety-wise. He poured what remained of the coffee into the flask lid and lit a cigarette. What could be nicer, he thought, than smoking Spanish tobacco and drinking real Spanish coffee? Except possibly having your whole body vigorously rubbed by a man with a cheese grater. He was sick of this armpit of a moon. He'd spent the last 6 months trying to get the $800 he needed to buy a shuttle ticket home. So far, he'd saved 53. And he was probably going to blow that tonight. Making money on Mimas wasn't easy. For a start, you needed a work permit, and Lister didn't have a work permit, because officially he didn't exist. Officially, Lister wasn't here. Officially, he was a space bag lady called Emily Birkenstein. Hence his problem, which he attempted to solve by stealing taxi hoppers. Each evening, or at least each evening he felt in the mood, which turned out to be about one evening in 4, he'd hang around taxi hopper ranks and wait for the drivers to converge for warmth and conversation in a single cab. When he was convinced it was safe, he'd steal the rearmost hopper and bounce around the seedier districts of the colony, where few taxicabs and absolutely no police ever went, and pocket the night's takings before abandoning the hopper at a busy rank back at Mimas Central. If he'd set about his hopper scam in a slightly more businesslike way, the chances are he'd have been off Mimas within a month. Unfortunately, he found Mimas so deeply depressing, quite the most hideous place he'd ever been, worse even than Wolverhampton, that quite regularly he felt compelled to hit the bars and drinking clubs and blow every single penny cent he'd saved. In some half-assed subconscious way, he felt that if only he could get drunk enough, he was sure to wake up back outside the Mary Lloyd public house off Regent Street in London, trying to hail a cab to get a Monopoly board. Sadly, the price of alcohol on Mimas was so outrageously prohibitive, he could only ever buy enough Myman sangria to get him in the mood to start drinking seriously before his money ran out, and he'd have to slope back to the shuttleport, where he'd hire a left luggage locker and sleep in it. Life, thought Lister, sucks. Outside the hopper, 2 pimps were having a minor disagreement about a girl named Sandra. It was brief, and for the most part friendly. It ended when the severed ear of the taller pimp landed with a soft, wet plop on the hopper's windscreen. Lister double-checked the door locks, and suddenly found it important to read the A to Z of Mimas with fierce concentration. He was only half aware of the hopper gently rocking from side to side as the 2 men rolled on his bonnet. Suddenly, there was another soft, wet plop, and a second, slightly smaller ear joined the first on his windscreen. "What the hell's happening?" thought Lister. "It's raining ears on me windscreen." He turned on the wipers and used his window wash. When the windscreen cleared, the ears had gone, and so had the pimps. Saturday nights on Mimas were wild. So wild, in fact, the Mimians had instigated an 8-day calendar, so that everybody could have 2 Sundays to recover from Saturday night. Sunday 1 and Sunday 2, then back to work on Monday. Lister looked at the hopper clock. 40 minutes since the man in the blue officer's coat had gone in for his meal. He slipped his taxi driver's nightstick up the arm of his jacket, stepped over the body of a dead, one-eared pimp, and dashed across the trotter towards the building with the girls, girls, girls sign. Dennis and Josie were lovers. Not that they actually made love, not anymore. They hadn't made love for the last 4 years. Neither of them had been capable of it. Dennis was into bliss, and Josie was a game-head. Dennis huddled in the shop doorway, tugging the remnants of his plastic mackintosh around his knees for warmth, his hangdog eyes searching the busy Mimean street for a roll. Even though it was cold, he was sweating. His stomach had bunched itself into a fist and was trying to punch its way out of his body. He hadn't eaten for 2 days. His last meal had been a slice of pizza he'd stolen off a drunk Astro. But it was a different kind of hunger that was gnawing him now. He took out a long, empty polythene bag and licked pathetically at its already well-licked insides. Dennis had a second-class degree in biochemistry, though if you asked him now, he probably couldn't even spell biochemistry. Josie was sitting by his side, laughing. She'd been laughing for nearly an hour. Her long, once blonde hair was matted into a series of whips, which lashed at her pale, grimy face as she tossed her head, giggling idiotically. Of the 2, she was the really smart one. Josie had a first-class degree in pure mathematics. Only right now, she couldn't even have counted her legs. They'd met at the New Zodiac Festival 6 years earlier, when the Earth's polar star had changed, and the entire zodiac had to be realigned. Everybody shifted one star sign forward. Josie had moved from Libra to Scorpio, and Dennis had changed from Sagittarius to Capricorn. It was a turning point in both their lives. They both felt so much happier with their new star signs, and along with the other 5,000 or so space beatniks who'd gathered for the 4-day festival in the Sea of Tranquility, they'd taken many, many drugs, and talked about how profoundly the shifting constellations had changed them, and how maybe the Druids were the only dudes who'd ever really got it right. Now they were on their way to Neptune for Pluto's solstice, when Pluto took over from Neptune as the outermost planet of the solar system. They'd been travelling for 5 years, and so far they'd only managed to bum their way up to Saturn. Still, they weren't in any particular hurry. The solstice wasn't going to happen for another 50 years. So Dennis scanned the street for a roll, while Josie sat beside him laughing. Across her brow gleamed the metal band of a game head. Underneath it, needle-thin electrodes punctured the skull and burrowed into her frontal lobes and hypothalamus. The game started out actually as a game. It was intended as the zenith of computer game technology. Tiny computer chips in the electrodes transmitted signals directly to the brain. No screens, no joysticks. You were really there, wherever you wanted to be. On the inside of your head, your fantasies were fulfilled. The game had been marketed as better than life. It was only a month after its release that people realized it was addictive. Better Than Life was withdrawn from the market, but illicit electronic labs began to make copies. It was the ultimate hallucinogenic, with only one real major drawback. It killed you. Once you entered Better Than Life, once you put on the headband and the needles wormed into your mind, it was almost impossible to get out. This was partly because you weren't even aware you were in Better Than Life in the first place. The game protected itself, hid itself from your memory. Your conscious mind was totally subverted, while your body slowly withered and died. At first, well-meaning friends tried to rescue gameheads by yanking the headset out of the skull, but this always resulted in instant death from shock. The only way out of the game was to want to leave it. But no one ever wanted to leave. Most gameheads, unable to look after themselves, died very quickly. But Josie had Dennis, and Dennis at least shared his food with her and kept her alive. When Josie first bought the headset from a South African game dealer on Callisto, she'd urged Dennis to get a set too. She wanted to try multi-using, when 2 or more headsets were connected together so the users could share the same fantasy. But Dennis was into Bliss. Bliss was a unique designer drug. Unique for 2 reasons. The first was that you could get addicted to Bliss just by looking at it, which made it very hard for the police to carry out drug busts. The second was its effect. It made you believe you were God. It made you feel as if you were all-seeing, all-knowing, eternal, and omnipotent. Which was laughable, really, because when you were high on Bliss, you couldn't even lace your shoes. The Bliss high lasted 15 minutes, and coming down, the resulting depression lasted 25 years. Few people could live with it, so they had to take another belt. Dennis took off his boot and unrolled a second polythene bag, which contained a teaspoonful of the soil-colored substance, and toyed with it pensively. He always saved a final belt for when he needed to roll someone for money, which was what he was going to do right now. Lister should have known better. He'd been on Mimas long enough to know not to turn round when he heard the voice. He should have put his head down and run, but he didn't. And by the time he worked out what was happening, it was too late.
"Stop, my son!"
the voice bellowed, and Lister twisted to see the Bliss freak in the plastic Macintosh swaggering towards him in a mysterious way.
"Dost thou knoweth who I am?"
Lister's eyes darted from side to side, looking for an exit, but the Bliss freak edged him into a doorway, and there was nowhere to go.
"Dost thou knoweth who I am?"
Yes, thought Lister. You're a smeggin' bliss freak. Yes, he said aloud. You're God, right? Dennis beamed and nodded sagely. The mortal had recognized him. Not everybody did.
That's right. I am God, and I have cometh to thee for a mighty purpose. I need some of your mortal money.
Lister nodded. Look, I'm completely strapped, man. I've got absolutely nothing on me. Not a bean. The bliss freak sighed heavily, trying to contain his wrath.
Would you like me to call down a mighty plague and lay waste this entire world?
No, Lister shook his head.
Would you like to be turned into a pillar of salt?
No, Lister shook his head again.
Then give me some money.
Look, I've told you, I'm broke. The bliss freak stuck his right hand into the pocket of his ragged raincoat.
I've got something in here that can hurt you.
Lister eyed him up and down. He wasn't that big, actually. And what did he have in his raincoat pocket that could hurt him? A lightning bolt? He decided to stand his ground. I don't believe you, he smiled pleasantly. The bliss freak took his hand out of his pocket and showed Lister what he had in there that could hurt him. It was his fist. He swung it round, hitting Lister on the side of his face. The punch had no strength, but it took Lister by surprise, and he banged his head against the edge of the doorframe and went down. When he came to, barely 30 seconds later, his $53 had gone, and so had God. Lister shakily made his way down the brothel's dusky-smelling staircase and stepped onto the red, thick pile carpet of the main reception area. Plastic palm trees encircled a vast, artificial heart-shaped lagoon in pink tile. Phallus diving boards cast frightening shadows onto the softly gurgling water, while Chinese chimes bedecked with glass erotica tinkled and chimed in the strawberry-scented breeze of the air conditioner. A black, fake marble staircase led up to a mezzanine level where 20-odd clam-shaped doors marked love suites circled the room. Music, which sounded as if all its charm and energy had been surgically removed, trickled out of a number of breast-shaped speakers. Various fat men of various nationalities sat around the lagoon in white towels sipping fake champagne cocktails. In front of Lister, a small red-haired man with a porky roll of flesh above his towel top was examining a line of girls.
This one's face.
Jeanette's face?
The madam followed behind him, taking notes.
This one's breasts.
Candy's bosom, an excellent and most popular choice.
Legs. I'll have the right one from her, and the left one from her.
The madam scribbled furiously.
Barbie's right, Tina's left, and what would Sarah like bottom-wise?
I think this one.
Mandy's derriere.
The madam clapped her hands, and 2 engineers began dismantling the android girls and reassembling them according to the client's order. Lister watched, trying to keep his lunch in his stomach, as limbs were changed and buttocks swapped, much to the apparent excitement of the small red-haired man. The madam turned to Lister.
Sorry to keep you waiting, sir. Would you like a pick and mix or an off the peg?
No, I don't want a girl.
That's absolutely no problem at all, sir. We have some beautiful boy droids.
No, this is kind of, embarrassing.
I understand,
she smiled. Before Lister could stop her, the madam clapped her hands, and a flock of android sheep barred their way noisily into the reception area.
No, look, listen.
Yes, sir?
You don't understand. One of the sheep turned and winked at him coquettishly, and wiggled off, hips swaying provocatively up towards the marble staircase. Oh my God, no. I'm looking for someone. I'm supposed to collect him. Lister described his fare, and the madam led him through to a rest room. The man with the false moustache was sitting in a jacuzzi, having a heated conversation with a member of staff.
I want my money back.
Absolutely, sir. This has never happened before.
She nearly pulled the damn thing off.
There was a slight circuitry problem.
She wouldn't stop. It was like being trapped in a milking machine.
Well, if sir would care to make another choice at the expense of the management...
Are you insane? It'll be out of commission for at least 12 months. If you hadn't heard my screams...
He looked up and saw Lister for the first time. There was an extraordinarily long pause.
You know,
he continued, pretending he hadn't seen Lister,
I don't think this is a restaurant at all. I haven't seen so much as a soupçon of the spicy bladderfish for which Mimas enjoys such a splendid reputation. I thought it was a bit strange the way you insisted I take off my clothes and wear this skimpy towel. In fact, if you want to know what I think, I don't think this is a small bijou eatery. I think it's a smegging brothel.
The officer continued his protestations of innocence all the way back to the docks. The hopper lurched to a halt outside the shuttleport hopper rank. Lister's fare climbed painfully from the cab, paid up, and leaned conspiratorially into Lister's window.
Look,
said the officer, his moustache still skew-whiff and curling at the edges from the heat of the Turkish bath.
Space Corps-wise, I'm pretty much of a high flyer. And career-wise,
he looked around,
it might not be such an A1 wonderful idea if this little adventure were to go any further.
Lister held out his hand, and the man pressed $1 pound into his palm and winked.
Go on,
he said.
Enjoy yourself on me.
Lister let him limp up to the automatic doors in the docking port before he leaned out of the window and shouted,
Hey, whoremonger!
The man raced back.
Keep your voice down, for mercy's sake, people can hear!
You made a mistake. Instead of $100 pound tip, you've only given me a $1 pound tip.
Right,
said the officer, loosening the buckle on his money belt and extracting a brown leather purse.
It's a dirty world, and I suppose I'm going to have to pay the toll.
He handed over a stale-smelling note.
You're very kind.
Lister took the note and stuck it behind the upturned earmuffs of his leather deerstalker.
Very kind.
Just provided we understand this is the end of the matter.
Sure.
Don't try coming back for more. Don't cross me, okay?
Sure.
Nobody crosses Christopher Todhunter and gets away with it.
He closed his purse, which was monogrammed Arnold J. Rimmer, BSc, SSC, and walked back across the forecourt. Lister leaned out of the window.
See you, Rimmer.
Yeah, bye,
said Rimmer absently. George McIntyre placed the antique Smith & Wesson in his mouth and pulled the trigger. His last thought was, I bet this doesn't work. But he was wrong. The bullet passed through the back of his head, killing him instantly, before it sailed through his rubber plant and ended its brief but eventful journey against the wall of his office. The rubber plant was surprised. If the rubber plant could have spoken, it wouldn't have said anything. That's how surprised the rubber plant was. Over the last few weeks, it had witnessed the gradual deterioration of McIntyre's mental health. But if the rubber plant had had a name, it would have said, George McIntyre is not the kind of guy to commit suicide, or my name's not, whatever its name would have been, had it had one. 3 medical orderlies duly arrived, followed by 2 doctors, the captain, the morale officer, and the ship's head of security. They put McIntyre's body on a stretcher and took him away. 8 people in all passed through McIntyre's room, and not one of them, the rubber plant reflected rather bitterly, had expressed the slightest interest in the gaping bullet hole which went straight through the middle of his favourite leaf. His biggest and greenest leaf. The only leaf he was truly 100% happy with. The humans muttered darkly about why McIntyre would have done such a thing. The rubber plant knew, but it wouldn't have told them, even if it could have. Saunders lay on the brown leather couch in the medical unit. Or so it appeared to the naked eye. In actuality, he was suspended 0.5 millimeter or so above it. The hologrammatic illusion of Saunders' body was provided by a light bee. The light bee, a minute projection device the size of a pinhead, hovered in the middle of his body, receiving data from the hologram simulation suite, which it then transmitted into a 3D form. The effect was so convincing, so real, that all holograms bore a 2-inch-high, metallic-looking H on their foreheads, so they could never be mistaken for living people. The stigma of the dead. Not the mark of Cain the killer, but the mark of Abel the slain. And so Saunders lay suspended, an infinitesimal distance above the brown leather couch in the medical unit, trying to fend off a vision of his wife's seduction of the entire offensive line of the London Jet 0G football team.
There was a being,
the metaphysical psychiatrist was saying,
and this being was called Frank Saunders. Now, that being died.
Yes,
said Saunders.
He was hit on the head by a 4,000-kilogram demolition ball. He couldn't be deader.
The good doctor shifted in his seat, crossed his thin legs in the opposite direction, and tugged thoughtfully on his long nose.
Frank,
he said eventually,
let me ask you a question. Do you believe man has an eternal soul?
I don't know,
Saunders said, wide-eyed with exasperation.
I'm from Sidcup. I'm an engineer.
I do, Frank.
Do you?
Yes, I do. And I believe, as we speak, Frank, your eternal soul has passed on to the next plane of existence, where it's very happy.
The point is,
Saunders said,
if you have an eternal soul, then there's got to be something badly wrong when it's having a lot more fun than you.
Look,
the metaphysical psychiatrist continued unabashed,
you are not the being called Frank Saunders. The being called Frank Saunders no longer exists in this dimension.
So who's lying on this brown leather couch talking to you, then?
You, Frank, are a simulation of Frank Saunders. You act in the way the computer estimates Frank Saunders would probably have acted. You are a simulation of a possible Frank Saunders, or rather more accurately, a probable Frank Saunders.
He said this very slowly, as if he were talking to a small baby who'd glooped mashed apple and apricot dessert over the jacket of his father's new suit. So, Saunders was a computer simulation of a probability of a possible person. He didn't feel like a computer simulation of a probability of a possible person. He also didn't feel like listening to another philosophical discussion about the nature of reality. What he did feel like was taking a small ball-peen hammer and tapping it several times on top of the balding pate of the metaphysical psychiatrist who was now twittering on about tables, and in particular, tables which had a quality of tableness. And then, when Saunders was completely lost, the balding counsellor asked him if he was familiar with the Cartesian principle.
Yes,
Saunders nodded.
Didn't they get to number 5 with baby I want your love thing?
No, Frank. The Cartesian principle is, I think, therefore I am. And although you're not thinking, the computer is just making you think you're thinking. Nevertheless, you think you're thinking, therefore you possibly are.
I possibly are?
Yes, Frank.
The psychiatrist smiled, believing Saunders had grasped the concept at last. For a short time, Saunders listened to the relentless clicking of the clock in the corner.
I possibly are what?
You possibly are.
Ah! I possibly are.
Yes!
The counsellor beamed.
Well, thank you for all your help.
Saunders got up and made his way to the exit hatch.
If I have any other little difficulties, any other little problems I don't understand, rest assured I'll be round in a shot.
I really have been of help?
None at all.
Saunders smiled for the first time in 2 weeks.
You're a useless, big-nosed goit.
As Saunders turned to go, Viner raced through his hologrammatic body and into the medical unit.
Sorry, Frank,
she said, turning to Saunders.
Doesn't matter. It's not as if I am, only possibly are, anyway.
Vina crossed into the room, her face flushed from running.
I've got some bad news, Frank. You'd better sit down.
Saunders was a little bemused as to what could possibly constitute bad news for a dead man. As Vina relayed the news of McIntyre's suicide, the consequences began to dawn on Saunders. McIntyre was a flight coordinator. He outranked Saunders. Hologram's simulation of a full human personality took up 40% of the computer's runtime and burned up enough energy per second to illuminate Paris for 3 years, which was why Red Dwarf was only able to sustain one hologram at a time. With his superior rank, McIntyre would take precedence over Saunders and become the ship hologram.
So, he said slowly, I'm going to be turned off.
Maybe not,
said the psychiatrist.
He committed suicide. Maybe he's unstable, not suitable for revival.
Of course he is,
Saunders said firmly.
I'm going to be turned off. I'm going to die for a second time in a fortnight.
He gave the air a celebratory uppercut and danced a little jig of joy.
Smegging great!
Surname?
David.
First name?
I told you, David.
Your name's David.
No, it's David Lister.
Caldecott sighed and reached for the Tipex. Lister gazed out onto the busy Myman street and tried to read the sign on the window. Ertnek, Tnem Tiersa, Neutaraprok, Gninim Retipuj. On a poster on the wall of the newly painted office, 2 crisply uniformed officers, male and female, linked arms and smilingly invited all and sundry to join the Corps and see space. Caldecott Tipexed out David from the surname box on the recruitment form, and in his meticulously neat handwriting replaced it with Lister.
Date of birth?
Unknown.
What do you mean, unknown?
I was found.
In what way, found?
In a pub, under the pool table.
Lister paused.
In a cardboard box.
Caldecott eyed him dubiously. Caldecott spent his entire working day sitting in his immaculate white uniform in the window of the recruitment center, projecting the Space Corps' corporate image, which was white and brave, strong and smiling. Once the suckers had signed up, they'd learn the truth soon enough. In the meantime, it was his job to be white and brave, strong and smiling. He looked at the object sitting opposite him, presently working some unspeakable substances from the tracks on the soles of his boots with one of Caldecott's pencils. 4 or 5 gangly matted plaits dangled from under the fur-rimmed leather deerstalker atop a podgy face built for a perpetual smile. Short, fat fingers, the nails blotched white from zinc deficiency, scratched at the gap between the beginning of green multi-stained combat trousers and the end of a T-shirt whose original colour was long lost in the mists of time. He looked like a casualty in a catering war, as if all the world's chefs had had a gigantic food fight, and somehow he'd got caught in the middle. The kind of guy, Caldecott reflected, if his daughter had brought him home, he'd have shot both of them.
Do you know when you were found?
He smiled whitely.
Sometime in November, 55.
Well, I need a date of birth for the form. When do you celebrate your birthday?
Most of the time, actually.
I'll put November the 1st, 2155.
Not November. I was about 6 weeks old. It was probably sometime in October.
Caldecott reached for the Tipex again.
How about October the 14th?
Brutal.
Why do you want to join the Space Corps?
Lister thought for a moment.
I want, he said, to visit strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no person has gone before.
Caldecott smiled wanly and wrote, "Possible attitude problem," in the comments box.
Qualifications?
Technical drawing.
What level?
What do you mean?
Master's degree, perhaps?
Said Caldecott, almost imperceptibly raising his left eyebrow.
PhD, maybe?
GCSE.
Caldecott wrote, 1 GCSE technical drawing.
It doesn't really count that, though, does it?
Lister picked at a flap of rubber hanging from the sole of his boot. Why not?
I failed.
Caldecott took out the Tipp-Ex again and obliterated the word possible. If you'd just like to read this through and sign what I've indicated. Caldecott pushed over the application papers, picked up the phone, and stabbed in a 10-digit number. Lister cast his eyes over the conditions of employment. He was signing up for 5 years, 5 long years. When he got out, he'd be pushing 30. An old man. Ha! Want a bet? He wondered why he hadn't thought of this before. Join the Space Corps, get on an earthbound ship, and as soon as he got home, thank you good night. Lister David, AWOL. He signed and pocketed the pen, including its metal chain and holder. Okay, said Caldecott, putting down the phone. The situation is this. There are 14 ships in dock, but no vacancies for anyone with your abilities.
What are my abilities?
You haven't got any. You'll have to enter at 3rd technician level.
Technician?
Repeated Lister, impressed. That's right, said Caldecott, smiling. A 3rd technician's duty basically consisted of making sure the vending machines didn't run out of chicken soup, mopping floors, and 1,001 other tasks considered too menial to bother the service droids. Caldecott didn't feel this was absolutely the best time to put Lister in the picture.
Technician,
said Lister, putting on a pseudo-swanky voice, and glancing up at the white-uniformed officer with a Burt Lancaster smile in the poster.
I'm a bleeding technician, don't you know?
As soon as something crops up, we'll let you know. Leave your address.
Address?
Lister wondered what to put. He settled on Luggage Locker 4179, Mimas Central Shuttle Station.
Shuttle flight JMC 159 for White Giant now boarding at gate number 5, the tannoy announced, and proceeded to make the same announcement in Esperanto, German, and 3 different dialects of Chinese.
A group of miners stubbed out their cigarettes and finished their beers, then reluctantly swung their kit bags over their shoulders before joining a group of white-suited officers and some grey-suited technicians in the queue to Gate 5. 2 shore patrol officers strode through the milling crowds, casually swinging their argument settlers. People pretended not to look at them. You didn't mess with the shore patrol, not unless you wanted your skull rearranged to resemble a relief map of Mars, canals and all.
This has got to be a joke. This is the address we were given, said the blonde.
They stopped at the huge bank of luggage lockers and looked around, searching for number 4179. The dark-haired one banged on the door.
This has got to be a joke, she repeated.
Lister was awakened from a dream about a pickle sandwich that spoke fluent Italian by the deafening metallic clanging as shore patrolwoman Henderson beat the luggage locker door with her steel truncheon.
It's a joke, I'm telling you.
Hang on,
called Lister.
Let me get dressed.
In the confined space of the locker, which was designed to accommodate 2 fairly decent-sized suitcases, he groped around in the blackness, located his clothes, and pulled on his coffee and upholstery polish-stained trousers.
Who is it?
Shore Patrol. We're looking for a guy called Lister.
I'll see if he's in,
called out Lister, stalling for time.
Why'd you want him?
He's been assigned. They found him a ship.
The door opened, and Lister jumped the 6 feet down to the ground. He cupped his chin in one hand, placed the other on the back of his head, and snapped his head to one side to the accompaniment of a series of stomach-churning cracks.
Your papers have come through, said Henderson, and—
Wait a minute,
said Lister.
I can't see yet. Give me a minute.
He blinked a few times and rubbed his eyes. Slowly the 2 shore patrol women came into focus.
Hi,
said Lister.
I'd invite you in, but it's a bit of a mess. It's more of a bachelor luggage locker than—
How long have you been sleeping in there?
Henderson interrupted.
Since my 2nd night on Mimas. I tried sleeping on a park bench, but I woke up in the middle of the night completely naked, and this old Chinese guy was licking my foot. So, compared to that, this is the Mimas Hilton.
No work permit, right?
I have, actually, but it belongs to a woman called Emily Birkenstein. It's a long story.
Get your stuff together.
I've got my stuff together.
Where is it?
In me pocket.
They walked back across the shuttle lounge towards the departure gates.
We've got to deliver you to Gate 9.
Time for breakfast?
If you make it quick.
Lister peeled off from his escort and, without ever stopping, walked through the nice and noodly quick food bar, picking up a half-eaten soya sandwich and a three-quarter-finished noodle burger people with weaker constitutions had left behind.
You're probably thinking I'm a slob,
said Lister, finishing off a quintuple-thick milkshake and hoovering around the base with the straw.
But I'm not. I'm just hungry, okay?
Hey, it's a real pity you've got to go on this ship and everything, said Henderson. Because otherwise you could maybe have taken me out for dinner. You know, a couple of half-eaten egg rolls, maybe root through a bin for the remnants of a Kentucky Fried Chicken, then back to your place for half a bottle of paraffin. Hey, it could have been so romantic.
Well, listen,
said Lister, totally missing the irony.
I'm not exactly married to this spaceship idea. Why don't we do it? Just promise not to bring your steel truncheon.
To Ganymede and Titan, yes sir, I've been around, but there ain't no place in the whole of space like that good old toddling town. Luna City 7, you're my idea of heaven. Out of 10, you score 11, you good old artificial terraformed settlement, you, yeah.
Through the shuttle's tinny sound system, Perry Nkwumo, the African ballad singer, was crooning one of the many easy listening hits from his best-selling album, Nice and Nauseating. Lister sat in the packed shuttle with the rest of the new recruits on the short 25-minute jag up to their assigned ship, gazing out from his window seat as Mimas dropped away below him like a bad taste he'd spat into the night. He thumbed through the shuttle's in-flight magazine, up and away. He stared for a brief moment at the blisteringly unpromising contents page. Salt, an epicure's delight, classic wines of Estonia, weaving the traditional way, were just some of the more fascinating articles. How was it possible, Lister wondered, to fill a 120-page magazine without actually including anything remotely readable? He tucked it back into the netting of the seat in front of him and decided to read the plastic card containing the crash landing instructions for the second time. The shuttle buzzed slowly through the groups of gargantuan space freighters that bobbed in orbit like a bunch of clumsy balloons. Aerodynamics were never a consideration in starship design. All the ships were constructed in orbit, designed never to land, never to encounter wind resistance or gravity, and consequently were a variety of bizarre and outlandish shapes. For 5 full minutes the shuttle ran alongside a supply ship called the Arthur C. Clarke, a 2-mile length of dirty grey steel, orange lights dotting the huge bulbous cargo hold, out of which sprang a long, thick tubular nose section, curling and twisting like the stem on an oriental hookah. Eventually the shuttle reached the cusp of the star freighter's bulb and turned. Lister's window was filled with red. And red. And red. He couldn't see where it started, and he couldn't see where it finished. But it was big. No, it was big. A big, red, big, clenched fist of metal. As the shuttle accelerated towards the redness, details slowly emerged through the thick gloom of space. Gradually, Lister made out the thousands of tiny pinpricks of windows and a tooth-floss-thin line of light ringing the ship, the vessel's metro system. A huge shadowy carbuncle jutted out a mile or so from the red monster's belly, a small moon, torn out of orbit and flung itself into the ship's solar plexus, and was now embedded into the hull like a giant stone leech. It hung there, like a bird that sits ignored on the back of a hippopotamus. As the shuttle swung out to align itself for docking, the red ship's nose cone loomed into view. 6 half-mile steel poles, bound by magnetic cables, as if the fist were clutching a huge shuttlecock. This was the scoop. The scoop sucked hydrogen from the currents of space and converted it into fuel, theoretically making the ship capable of travelling forever. Lister was aware of the hot whiskey breath of the burly astro beside him, who was now leaning over him to share his window.
"The dwarf,"
he said in a Danish accent, ripping open another can of Glen Fujiyama.
The what?
Lister tried not to inhale.
"Red dwarf.
How big is it?"
It could eat Copenhagen,"
said the Dane,
"and have Helsingør for afters."
Lister accepted a belt from the whiskey can, and they swapped names.
"It's got to be 5 miles long."
"Something like that,"
said Peterson. Lister squinted out of the window again.
"And God, is it ugly?"
"Ugly as my mother."
Peterson smiled through the barbed, all-broken teeth.
"First trip?"
Lister nodded. Peterson belched, crumpled up the whiskey can, tossed it into the aisle, and fished in his knapsack for another.
"I'd offer you one,"
he said apologetically.
"But I only have 12 left. Been on Mimas long?"
6 months.
"It's a bit of a dump, right?"
It's a lot of a dump.
"Wait till we get to Triton. Triton's okay."
Triton?
Lister's brow furrowed.
We're going to Earth.
"Sure we're going to Earth, but first we've got to go to Triton to get the ore to take to Earth."
Lister closed his eyes.
Where's Triton?
"Round Neptune."
Oh,
said Lister.
Neptune, right.
He took a swig from Peterson's nearly empty whiskey can.
Where's Neptune?
"From here?"
Peterson took out a calculator.
"I'll tell you exactly."
He punched a lot of numbers into the machine.
"It's 2,707,000,000 miles away."
Lister sighed like a burst tire.
How long is that going to take?
"Oh, say 18 months,
said Peterson.
18 months, not counting customs, and Triton immigration control is a son of a bitch. It's worse than New York.
18 months?
Then 12 months mining.
12 months mining?
Then 2 more years to get back to Earth.
4.5 years?
It's an old ship. It only does 200,000 miles an hour.
4.5 years?
Lister repeated like a mantra.
4.5 years?
He turned and looked out of the window as the shuttle ducked into the trench cut deep into Red Dwarf's back. On either side, buildings flitted past, skyscrapers, tower blocks 100 stories high, monoliths of steel and glass. 1 minute, it was as if they were flying through Manhattan. Then without warning the architecture changed, and it looked like Moscow. Then fluted pillars and elaborate neo-classic arches, and they could have been in New Athens. A tasteless mishmash of styles from the decades upon decades the vast mining ship took to build. For a tantalizing moment, between a huge mosque-shaped dome and a line of industrial chimneys, the tiny blue light that was Earth winked and flickered invitingly in the glow of the distant sun. Then just as suddenly was gone, as they swooped towards the yawning doors of the docking bay.
4.5 years,
said Lister catatonically. Lister pushed through the crowded docking bay, fighting his way to the intake clearance zone, a now moronically drunk Peterson in tow. They'd been stopped at Red Dwarf Customs, and Peterson had been bag-searched. His possessions had comprised of a toothbrush, 1 pair of underpants, 3 socks, and 11 cans of whiskey. Informed that he couldn't bring the liquor aboard without paying duty, he had stood in the green channel and downed all 11 cans, one after the other, offering Lister a sip a can. Now Peterson was walking sideways, his head cocked at a curious angle, singing a lewd Danish folk song, punctuated with appropriate gestures and slobbering leers, as Lister dragged him by his lapel towards the moving walkway. High above, dominating the ship's shuttle port, was a monitor screen the size of a football pitch, from which a disembodied head was lugubriously dispensing information. The head was a digitalized reproduction of a balding 40-year-old man, with a voice that had a slight East London twinge.
The floor stopped moving,
said Peterson, as they reached the end of the walkway.
That's a very good thing.
Lister scanned the various name cards Red Dwarf induction staff were holding above the heads of the jostling crowd.
Hi, I'm Chomsky.
Chomsky Pierre, right?
Rogerson ticked his clipboard.
Okay, stand there a second. We're still looking for a Burroughs, a Peterson, a Schmidt, and a Lister.
I'm a Lister,
said Lister.
I'm going to be sick,
said Peterson, and he was. Exorcist sick. A pause. A sigh. Peterson smacked his lips and wiped his face with the back of his sleeve.
That's better.
Two scutters, claw-headed service droids which looked like miniature amputee giraffes on motorized bases, swept into view and cleaned up the mess. Peterson tried to tip them.
We're still looking for a Burroughs and a Schmidt,
Rogerson said, trying to disguise his disgust.
What's that thing?
Asked Lister, pointing up to the disembodied head on the monitor screen.
Holly, the ship's computer. He's got an IQ of 6,000. You want to ask him a question?
Like what?
Like anything at all.
Rogerson called up to the ceiling.
Hey, Holly, this is Lister.
The huge eyes rolled down in their direction.
I know. Lister David. Date of birth, October 14th, 2155. Qualifications, GCSE, technical drawing. Failed. Rank, technician 3rd class. Ambitions, to visit strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no person has gone before. All right, Dave?
A huge eyelid rolled over the digital eye and winked at Lister.
Ask him something,
Rogerson urged.
Who holds the all-time record for 3-dimensional yardage in a single zero-G football season?
Jim Bexley Speed. London Jets roof attack, season 74-75. 4,636 square yards in the regular season.
And what colour tie was he wearing when he was interviewed by Mark Matheson after Mega Bowl 102?
Aquamarine with a diagonal lemon stripe.
Brutal!
Lister grinned. Chomsky chipped in.
Who was the Chinese emperor of the Ming dynasty in 1620?
Tai Chang,
Holly replied immediately.
Also known as Chu Chang Lo Kwang Tsung, born 1582.
They all began shouting up questions. Who was the? How many? When did? And one by one, Holly got them right. Finally, Peterson asked a question.
Why is the room going round and round?
Because you're drunk,
said Holly.
That's right!
Peterson clapped, delighted. Burroughs and Schmidt finally arrived, and the 10 of them were herded onto the Red Dwarf's Northern Line, one of a network of tube trains which crisscrossed the length and breadth of the ship. Spread evenly throughout the carriage were more monitors displaying the genius computer, who was capable of conducting several thousand conversations simultaneously, ranging from what was on the ship's movie channel that night to discussing the melding of quantum mechanics and general relativity. Some 30 minutes later, they boarded the express superlift, which whisked them up to floor 9172, where they were met by a ship rover, a 3-wheel electric buggy bus, and driven down 2 miles of corridors towards sleeping quarter Area P.
Okay,
said Rogerson, showing Lister into his sleeping quarters.
Make yourself at home. I'll just go and fix up the other guys.
Lister looked round the room, which was going to be his home for the next 4.5 years. Dull, gunmetal grey walls reflected his mood. Neon strips around the walls simulated the time of day, Dirty yellow at the moment signalled the middle of the afternoon. A dirty orange would signal early evening, and a dirty blue would indicate night. 2 bunk cubicles were carved into recesses in the wall, one above the other, while to the right stood a simple pedestal wash basin and mirror, which, when voice-activated, swiveled on its base, revealing an antiquated chemical toilet which bore the legend, "Now please irradiate your hands." Lister began to wish he was in his nice, cosy luggage locker back at Mimas Central. Behind him was a bank of fitted aluminium wardrobes, and 2 steps led down to what was laughingly signposted lounge area. The lounge area was about 2 meters square, with a 3-seater reinforced steel settee and a tiny coffee table welded to the floor.
Nice,
thought Lister.
very homely.
The other occupant of the room left very little evidence of his existence. Whatever he did possess was meticulously tidied away. On the wall of his bunk, the lower one, hung a homemade revision timetable in worryingly neat handwriting and an array of startlingly complex color codes. Beside it were a number of certificates, neatly framed, and a series of cut-out newspaper headlines, all along the lines of, "Arnie does it best," "Arnie comes out on top," and "Arnold, a living legend." Lister scanned the titles in the bookcase built into a recess above the video screen. Astronavigation and invisible number theory made simple. Conceptual foundations of quantum mechanics made simple. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle for beginners. An introduction to the liar paradox and the non-mechanizability of mathematics, and how to get more girls by hypnosis. He opened his bunkmate's wardrobe and peered in. 20 pairs of identical military blue underpants hung on coat hangers in protective cellophane sheaths, next to 7 pairs of pale blue pajamas with dry cleaning tags pinned to the collars. Lister was disturbed to see that the pockets of the pajamas were mounted with an insignia of rank. Brightly polished boots stared unblinkingly in rows on the floor. A pair of monogrammed slippers stood beside them in shoe trees. Lister closed the wardrobe, struck a match on the "no smoking" sign, lit up, and sat down on the metal settee.
Nice. Very, very nice.
Rogerson came back in.
"Oh, David, meet your bunkmate."
Lister looked up. Behind Rogerson stood a grey-suited technician, tall and rangy, flared nostrils, wide, slightly manic eyes, and a hyperactive, constantly jiggling right leg that always seemed to want to be somewhere else. Even without his false moustache, there was no mistaking the officer who'd hired his hopper.
"He's also your shift leader, so he's the guy who'll be showing you the ropes. Lister, this is first technician—"
Arnold Rimmer, said Lister. We've already met.
No, we haven't,
said Rimmer, smiling too much.
You're a technician,
said Lister, surprised.
I thought you said you were an officer.
Shut up,
said Rimmer, pumping his hand and smiling even harder. On the first morning into space, Lister sat in the lecture theatre with the other 11 members of Z-Shift in his brand-new technician's uniform which made him itch in 19 different places, while his left arm and his right buttock competed for the title of most painful appendage following his 12 inoculation jabs. The rest of the previous morning and the whole of the afternoon had been a long process of multifarious humiliations. Hours standing around in backless surgical gowns. Why backless? When did a surgeon ever need to get to your bottom in a hurry? Giving various bodily fluid samples. Peterson had in fact delivered rather more bodily fluid samples than was absolutely necessary, and nobody was pleased. IQ tests, genetic fingerprinting, hand-to-eye coordination work, centrifugal weightlessness simulation. Then finally, they'd all been marched like a serpent of schoolchildren down to the computer decks, where they each had their personalities recorded for storage in the hologram library. Lister had sat in the suite, a metal skull cap bolted to his head, while his every memory and personality trait had been logged into a depressingly small computer slug. His entire life, his whole personality copied and duplicated on a piece of computer hardware the size of a suppository. Peterson's recording had crashed 3 times with an error message which read, "Non-human life form," and in the end, they had to drip-feed him coffee and subject him to several very cold showers before his brain was functioning sufficiently well to be recorded. If, in the highly unlikely circumstance of Peterson's achieving the status of indispensable personnel, and then dying, he would be revived as a hologram with the mater and pater of all hangovers. The lecture theatre hatchway breezed open, and Rimmer clicked up to the podium in boots so brightly polished you could see infinity in them. The previous evening in the sleeping quarters, no mention had been made of the incident in the brothel. In fact, Rimmer had played the part of a man who'd never met Lister before very credibly indeed. He was, he had declared, not exactly in love with the idea of bunking out with a subordinate, but it was something that they both had to put up with.
"There's just one rule," he'd maintained, polishing his boots for the 3rd time. "And that rule is KIT. Do you know what KIT stands for?"
Ken is a transvestite?
Lister had offered.
Keep it tidy. And if you kit, then we'll godgv.
He'd left this hanging in the air for effect before translating,
"Get on just famously."
Lister spent the rest of the evening trying to take advantage of the fact that he now had a proper bed, of sorts, for the first time in 6 months. Though curiously, he discovered that he couldn't drop off to sleep until he sat up in bed and wrapped both arms around his knees, luggage locker style. Meanwhile, Rimmer sat at his slanting architect's desk and whiled away the time up until lights out, reading a book called How to Overcome Your Fear of Speaking in Public. Rimmer gripped the podium tightly, the inside of his wrists pointing out towards the new intake, a trick which his book had told him would make his audience trust him, and began his speech to Z-shift.
"My name," he said, "is Arnold J. Rimmer. You will call me Sir, or First Technician. I am your shift leader. This is my very first command, and I don't intend it to be my last. What I do intend is for Z-Shift to become the best, the fastest, the tightest, the most efficient routine maintenance, cleaning and sanitation unit this ship, or any other ship in the Space Corps, has ever seen." He paused.
Silence. The book said silence could be as effective as speech, if used judiciously. Use silence, it urged. Rimmer stood there, being silent. Enough silence, he decided. More speech.
"When we do something, we do it fast, and we do it right."
More silence. Still more silence. No, this was a dumb place to have silence. It just made him look like he'd forgotten what he was saying.
"This ship is 3 miles wide, 4 miles deep, and nearly 6 miles long, but—"
He paused again, a most excellent and petite silence, he congratulated himself. Very telling.
"If anywhere on it a vending machine so much as runs out of chicken soup, I want a member of Z-Shift to be there within 4 minutes.
More silence. The best silence yet.
"You used to think your mother was your best friend. Not anymore. From now on, your best friend is this."
He held aloft a 3-foot-long metallic tube with a very twist grip and 7 detachable heads.
"It's called a sonic super mop. It washes, it steam cleans, it mops, and it vacuums. And from now on, it never leaves your side. Wherever you go, the SSM goes with you. You work with it, you eat with it, you sleep with it."
The new members of Z-Shift exchanged glances. Rimmer gave them another shot of silence. It had gone well, he thought. Nice, pointy speech. Some good silences. No, some great silences. and he was especially proud of the macho bit at the end about the sonic supermop, which he'd lifted shamelessly from his favourite movie, God, I Love This War. Lister stood up and snapped a salute.
Sir, permission to speak, sir?
Sloppy salute, Rimmer thought. He'd have to teach them all his own salute, the one he'd invented, the one he'd drawn diagrams of and sent off to the Space Ministry in the hope it would replace the passé old-fashioned standard one. It was a great salute, and one day it would make him famous. It went thus. From the standard attention pose, the saluter brought his right arm sharply out in front of him at a perfect right angle with his body. He then twirled his wrist in 5 circles to symbolize the 5 arms of the Space Corps, then snapped his arm back, fingers rigid, to form an equilateral triangle with his forehead, then straightened the elbow so the arm was pointing sideways from the body, from which position it was snapped smartly back down to his side. There were also variants. The double rimmer, for dress occasions, where the salute was performed with both arms simultaneously, and the half rimmer, with only one arm and only 3 circles for emergency situations when there wasn't enough time to carry out the full rimmer.
"Permission granted," said Rimmer, returning Lister's salute with a 5-loop full rimmer.
Sir?
"Yes, Lister?"
Is it possible to get a transfer to another shift, sir?
"Why?"
Well, with respect, sir, I think you're mentally unstable.
"Sit down." Rimmer shook his head. "There's always one, isn't there? One wag, one clown, one imbecile."
Yes, sir, Lister agreed. But he's not usually in charge, sir.
Laughter. This was a tricky situation. Rebellion, a loss of respect. It had to be stamped on. It had to be crushed. His book on poweramics was quite clear on that. To crush a minor mutiny, you choose the leader, the toughest, the biggest, the strongest, and you humiliate him, and the rest follow like lambs. Don't look angry. Smile. Real power, true power, is unspoken, understated. Rimmer smiled. Slowly they stopped laughing. Excellent. Time to strike. Without warning, he wheeled round and pointed, "You! On your feet!" A man with a face like moon rock hauled his 250-pound frame onto its feet. Rimmer climbed down from the podium and slowly, casually, strolled over to face him. He looked up at the small black shark eyes, the bald bullet head, the long, matted nostril hair. He was a good 18 inches taller than Rimmer, and Rimmer was tall. "What are you chewing?" Rimmer said, after a suitable amount of silence.
"Tobacco."
"Tobacco?" A grin.
"Yeah."
Defiance. Rimmer smiled and nodded, looking around the lecture theatre.
"Well, I hope you brought enough along for all of us."
The others laughed, on Rimmer's side.
"Well?"
"No."
Slightly nonplussed.
"Nope, sir."
Victory.
"Get rid of it!"
The big man chewed thoughtfully for a few seconds. Then suddenly, a long plume of brown sputum plopped onto the polished toe cap of Rimmer's left boot. Rimmer looked at his left boot, then slowly raised his head.
"Some people's respect I've won already. I can see with you it's going to take a little longer. Now, get on the floor and give me 50, mister."
Said the big man, and a second stream of half-chewed tobacco arrived on Rimmer's right boot. Rimmer rocked back and forth on his heels, nodding his head, and still smiling.
"Right, okay,"
he said pleasantly.
"I think that's about everything. Shift, dismiss."
Slowly Z Shift began to meander out of the lecture theatre.
"Oh, by the way,"
Rimmer called after the tobacco chewer. As the man half-turned, Rimmer leapt through the air, and with a kamikaze scream wrapped his arms and legs round the big man's frame, and they crashed into a row of chairs. As Lister left the theatre, Rimmer was having his head rhythmically beaten against one of the desktops. "Bonk! Fine," Rimmer was saying. "Bonk! There's nothing wrong. Bonk with your reactions. Bonk! Just checking. Bonk! So you like chewing tobacco, eh? Bonk! Well, that's absolutely fine and dandy. Bonk! Perhaps you'd like me to run down to supplies and buy you some more. Bonk! I think I'm going to lose consciousness now. Bonk, bonk, bonk." Everyone agreed it was a splendid funeral, but no one enjoyed it more than the deceased himself. "I can't tell you how great it is being dead," he told everyone who would listen. "It solved all my problems." Every off-duty member of the 11,169-strong crew had packed into the vast ship canteen. McIntyre sat at the top table, a huge coffin-shaped cake containing his own effigy in marzipan before him, and listened, his ego aglow, while his fellow officers sang his praises. Saunders, much to his own personal delight, had finally been turned off, and although initially there had been some concern about hologrammatically reviving a man who had killed himself, those doubts were allayed when the reasons for McIntyre's suicide were discovered. McIntyre rose to the sound of tumultuous applause and fingered the H emblazoned on his hologrammatic forehead, as over 8,000 people stamped on the floor and banged wine glasses with forks and spoons. "Well, first I want to thank the captain for his beautiful eulogy. It was very flattering and deeply moving, and it was well worth all that time I spent writing it." A huge laugh echoed round the canteen, and McIntyre smiled happily. "On a serious note, I know there's a rumour going round that I committed suicide. I'd like to try and explain why I did it." McIntyre started to talk about his gambling debts he'd incurred during his ship leave in bars on Phoebe, Dion, and Rhea playing Toot. Toot was a banned blood sport, involving a fight to the death between two specially bred Venusian fighting snails. The ferocious crustaceans, with hand-sharpened horns, would meet in a 6-foot square pit, and bets would be taken on the eventual victor. Eventual was the word. A single butt from a Venusian fighting snail could take upwards of 3 hours to deliver, and the whole combat often took days. Meanwhile, the baying spectators got drunker and drunker, placing bets of wilder and wilder proportions. You could lose a lot of money playing Toot, and McIntyre had. McIntyre admitted it was a cruel and pointless sport, which said much about man's inhumanity to just about everything to which he could be inhuman. But the buzz of watching two killer crustaceans charging about slowly in the concrete pit, the roaring of the crowd as one snail drew blood, and the other retreated into its shell for hours on end, well, you had to be there to believe it. Before he knew it, McIntyre had debts amounting to almost 5 times his annual salary. In desperation to pay off the Ganymedian mafia, who ran the snail pits, he'd taken a massive loan from the Golden Assurance Friendly and Caring Loan Society, which, as it turned out, was also run by the Ganymedian mafia. He didn't know it when he signed, but they charged an annual percentage rate, APR, of 9,800%. The clause in the contract which specified this took the term small print into a whole new dimension. The clause was concealed in a microdot, occupying the dot above the I, on page 3 of the loan agreement in the phrase, "Welcome. You are now a member of the Golden Assurance family." Startled to discover his first monthly installment was some 7 times more than the original loan, he gambled what was left, and lost that too. McIntyre wrote to the society, explaining the situation, and a number of increasingly anxious letters were exchanged during Red Dwarf's tour of the Saturnian satellites. Eventually, McIntyre agreed to meet a representative from the company's head office when the ship docked over Mimas to discuss a repayment plan. Duly on the first evening in orbit round Mimas, McIntyre donned his dress uniform and went to the coffee lounge of the Mimas Hilton, where he met 3 gentlemen, representatives of the Golden Assurance Friendly and Caring Loan Society, who arrived on Mimas's one and only 5-star hotel, brandishing a pair of industrial cable clippers. There, before the eyes of hotel guests casually taking coffee and scones with clotted cream, McIntyre was force-fed his own nose. He needed little further persuasion before deciding to try a new repayment plan, and finally plumped for the Golden Assurance Friendly and Caring Loan Society's Pay by this Evening and Don't Get Murdered Super Discount Scheme. Half crazed with fear, he staggered back to his office aboard Red Dwarf, briefly explained his predicament to his rubber plant, and killed himself. The beauty part of this scheme was, of course, that as a hologram, he was now safe from reprisals. He could continue his life dead and untroubled. Which is why he was telling everyone who would listen how great it was to be dead, and how it had solved all his problems. McIntyre finished his speech by thanking everyone for their understanding and kind words, and concluded by paraphrasing Mark Twain.
"Rumours of my death,"
he said,
"have been greatly understated."
Out of the 8,000 assembled, only 5 people got this joke, and none of them laughed. McIntyre didn't even understand it himself. He'd been told to say it by the ship's metaphysical psychiatrist, who assured him it would get a
big laugh.
After the toast, the captain, a short, dumpy American woman, who'd had the misfortune to be born with the surname Kirk, made a short, yet very boring speech, welcoming the new intake aboard, and outlining the schedule for the jag to and from Triton, before sitting down and thus signalling the beginning of McIntyre's death disco. The huge sound system vibrated and shook as it pumped out a hip-hoppabilly reggae number from a band which had been red-hot for 2 weeks, 5 years previously. 2,000 crew members stood on the dance floor, swaying and sweating, while the rest sat around tables drinking and sweating. Though they'd been aboard less than 2 days, all the lowlifes, ne'er-do-wells, and slobs in general had somehow found each other, kindred spirits, and were sitting around in noisy, moronic pockets having drinking competitions. Equally, all the ambitious career types had somehow been sucked together and were drinking low-alcohol white wine or slimline mineral water and talking intensely about work. Except for Phil. For some reason, Phil Burrows had accidentally got himself attached to Lister's group. Phil was a serious-minded academy undergrad on a 2-year attachment. It will be a full 24 hours before he realized he had joined the wrong group, and had absolutely nothing in common with any of the people with whom he was presently sharing his evening. In the meantime, Peterson was pouring a pint of beer into his jacket pocket.
"That's my beer! What the hell are you doing?"
screamed Phil.
"It's just my way,"
Peterson beamed charmingly.
"of saying it's your round, pal."
Phil got up and staggered to the bar. Although there were only 5 of them at the table, Lister, Peterson, Chen, Selby, and himself, he'd been told to order 20 pints of beer. For some reason, he couldn't understand every round consisted of 4 pints each.
"Saves on shoe leather,"
Peterson had pointed out. It didn't seem to matter whether or not you wanted them either. Each round, Phil had requested a low-alcohol white wine, and each round he'd been delivered 4 pints of foaming Japanese lager. He knew for a fact Chen and Peterson were filching at least 2 of his 4 pints, but that was absolutely fine with him, because his top limit was 3 pints a night, and he'd had 7 already. 3 identical barmen asked for his order. He asked for 20 pints, laid his head in a beery pool on the bar, and promptly fell asleep. Back at the table, Lister finished his story about how he'd been shanghaied aboard. He'd embellished it only slightly. In his version, for instance, both the shore patrol women had seduced him in a photo-you-quick booth, and that's why he had the slightly shocked expression on his passport photograph. Peterson took his turn. He'd arrived on Mimas on a nuclear waste dump ship called Pax Vert, which had ejected its putrid load on the Saturnian moon of Tethys, and was now returning to Earth. He was trying to work his passage across the solar system to Triton, where he'd bought a house. As he explained, since Triton was on the very edge of the solar system, being over 2.5 billion miles away from Earth, house prices there were really reasonable. For just $2,000 pounds, Peterson had bought a 25-bedroom home dome with 12 ensuite bathrooms and a 0G squash court.
At first, I thought there was something wrong with it,
he said, showing Lister a sketch he'd been sent by the estate agent.
But look, it's beautiful.
They didn't send you a photograph?
Said Lister, his eyes narrowing.
No, you can't photograph in a methane atmosphere.
You're telling me they haven't installed an oxygen atmosphere yet?
No, I'll have to wander around my house in a spacesuit, but that's why it's so cheap.
He quickly downed 2 pints.
You want to move there. There's a plot of about 2,000 miles right next door to me. I'm telling you, it's a great investment. 10, 12 years, they have plans to install oxygen. Can you imagine what will happen to house prices once the atmosphere's breathable? They'll rocket, baby!
Lister looked at him. Was he serious? Yes, he was.
No, listen,
Peterson continued.
Do you know Triton is the only moon in the whole solar system which rotates in the opposite direction to the planet it's orbiting?
Peterson demonstrated the scientific principle by rotating his head and swooshing his beer glass around it the other way. Thin, fizzy lager cascaded onto the already sodden table.
Maybe,
said Lister, who was seriously beginning to wonder whether Peterson was brain-damaged.
But that's no reason to buy a house there.
True,
agreed Peterson.
But if you ever have guests, it's a nice talking point.
The music changed. A Johnny Cologne number. Press your lumps against mine. It was smooch time. There was a loud scraping of chairs as people stood up and guided their partners onto the already packed dance floor. A huge, multi-limbed beast rippled, ebbing and flowing, contracting and expanding to the gentle sway of the music. Lister suddenly found himself alone at the table, the others lost in the undulating, pulsing mass of smooching bodies. He squinted drunkenly around the vast disco. So many people. People dancing, people touching, people laughing, people talking, people kissing. So many people. In just over 7 months, every one of them would be dead. Five months later, Lister stared out of the sleeping quarters viewport window and saw nothing. Just a few very distant stars and an awful lot of black. It was pretty much the same view he'd had for the past 21 weeks. At first he'd found it awe-inspiring. Then slowly, that had given way to just plain dull. Then very dull. Then deeply dull. And now it was something below deeply dull, and even below deeply hideously dull. A word for which had yet to be devised. It was, he thought, even more mind-numbingly, deeply, hideously dull than an all-nighter at the Scala watching a 12-hour season of back-to-back Peter Greenaway movies. If you went to the British Library and changed every word in every single book to the word dull, and then read all the books out in a boring monotone, you would come pretty close to describing Lister's life on board Red Dwarf. He looked at his watch. 1950 ship time. He was waiting for Peterson to show up, and they were going down to the Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar to spend the evening in the exact same way they'd spent 133 of the last 147 evenings. Drinking hugely elaborate San Francisco earthquakes from plastic coconuts with Chen and Selby and failing to meet any interesting women. Or, more to the point, any interesting women who were interested in them. Dull and gruesomely monotonous as his social life was, Lister knew for a fact that it was at least 474 times more interesting than his working life on Z shift under Rimmer. Rimmer was sitting at his slanting architect's desk under the pink glow of his study lamp, with a tray of watercolours, making out a revision timetable in preparation for his astronavigation exam. In all, he'd taken the exam 11 times. 9 times he'd got an F for fail, and on 2 occasions he'd got an X for unclassified. But he persevered. Each night he persevered under the pink glow. Each night he nibbled away at his skyscraper-high stack of files which stored his loose-leaf revision notes. He nibbled away, trying to digest little morsels of knowledge. Little morsels that stuck in his gullet, that wouldn't go down. It was like trying to eat wads of cotton wool. But he persevered. Rimmer wanted to become an officer. He ached for it. He yearned for it. It wasn't the most important thing in his life. It was his life. Given the opportunity, he would gladly have had his eyes scooped out if it meant he could become an officer. He would happily have inserted 2 red-hot needles simultaneously through both his ears so they met in the middle of his brain and tap-danced the title song from 42nd Street barefoot on a bed of molten lava while giving oral sex to a male orangutan with dubious personal hygiene. If only it meant attaining that single elusive golden bar of an astronavigation officer 4th class. But he had to do something much more demanding, much more impossible, and much more unpleasant. He had to pass the astronavigation exam. Born on Io, one of Jupiter's moons, 31 years earlier, he was the youngest of 4 brothers. Frank was a gnat's wing away from becoming the youngest captain in the Space Corps. John was the youngest captain in the Space Corps. Howard had graduated 3rd in his class at the Academy and was now a test pilot for the new generation of demi-light-speed zippers at Houston, Earth. "My boys," his mother would say. "My clever, clever boys. Johnny the captain, Frankie the first officer, Howie the test pilot, and Arnold. Arnold the chicken soup machine cleaner. If you could sue sperm, I'd sue the sperm that made you."
"I'll do it, Mother. One day I will become an officer."
"And on that day," his mother would say, "Satan will be going to work in a snowplow." If Rimmer hadn't been such a dedicated anal retentive, he would have realized the simple truth. He wasn't cut out for space. He wasn't cut out for it. He would have realized he wasn't the slightest bit interested in astronavigation, or quantum mechanics, or any of the things he needed to be interested in to pass the exams and become an officer. 3 times he'd failed the entrance exam to the Academy, and so one night, after reading the life story of Horatio Nelson, he'd signed up with a merchant vessel as a lowly 3rd technician, with the object of quickly working his way through the ranks and sitting the astronavigation exam independently, and thereby earning his commission, the glimmering gold bar of officerhood. That had been 6 years ago. 6 long years on Red Dwarf, during which he'd leapt from being a lowly 3rd technician to being a lowly 1st technician. In the meantime, his brothers went forever onward, up the ziggurat of command. Their success filled him with such bitterness, such bile, that even a Christmas card from one of them, just the reminder that they were alive and successful, would reduce him to tears of jealousy. And now he sat there, under the pink glow of his student's table lamp. "Reduces eye strain, promotes concentration, aids retention," was the lamp manufacturer's proud boast, preparing to sit the astronavigation exam for the 13th time. He found the process of revising so gruelingly unpleasant, so galling, so noxious, that like most people faced with tasks they find hateful, he devised more and more elaborate ways of not doing it in a doing-it kind of way. In fact, it was now possible for Rimmer to revise solidly for 3 months and not learn anything at all. The first week of study, he would always devote to the construction of a revision timetable. At school, Rimmer was always at his happiest colouring in geography maps. Under his loving hand, the ice fields of Europa would be shaded a delicate blue. The subterranean silica deposits of Ganymede would be rendered centimetre by painstaking centimetre a bright and powerful yellow, and the regions of frozen methane on Pluto slowly became a luscious, inviting green. Up until the age of 13, he was constantly head of the class in geography. After this point, it became necessary to know and understand the subject, and Rimmer's marks plunged into the murky depths of F for fail. He brought his love of cartography to the making of revision timetables. Weeks of patient effort would be spent planning, designing and creating a revision schedule which, when finished, were minor works of art. Every hour of every day was subdivided into different study periods, each labelled in his lovely, tiny copperplate hand, then painted over in watercolours, a different colour for each subject, the colours gradually becoming bolder and more urgent shades as the exam time approached. The effect was as if a myriad tiny rainbows had splintered and sprinkled across the poster-sized sheet of cream-wove card. The only problem was this. Because the timetables often took 7 or 8 weeks, and sometimes more to complete, by the time Rimmer had finished them, the exam was almost on him. He'd then have to cram 3 months of astronavigation revision into a single week. Gripped by an almost deranging panic, he'd then decide to sacrifice the first 2 days of that final week to the making of another timetable. This time, for someone who had to pack 3 months of revision into 5 days. Because 5 days now had to accommodate 3 months' work, the first thing that had to go was sleep. To prepare for an unrelenting 24-hour-a-day sleep-free schedule, Rimmer would spend the whole of the first remaining day in bed, to be extra ultra-fresh, so he would be able to squeeze 3 whole months of revision into 4 short days. Within an hour of getting up the next morning, he would feel inexplicably exhausted and start early on his supply of Go Double Plus caffeine tablets. By lunchtime, he'd overdose and have to make the journey down to the ship's medical unit for a sedative to help him calm down. The sedative usually sent him off to sleep, and he'd wake up the following morning with only 3 days left, and an anxiety that was so crippling he could scarcely move. A month of revision to be crammed into each day. At this point he would start smoking. A lifelong non-smoker, he'd become a 40-a-day man. He'd spend the whole day pacing up and down his room, smoking 3 or 4 cigarettes at a time, stopping occasionally to stare at the titles in his bookcase, not knowing which one to read first, and popping twice the recommended dosage of dog-worming tablets, which erroneously he believed to contain amphetamine. Realizing he was getting nowhere, he tried to get rid of his soul-bending tension by treating himself to an evening in one of Red Dwarf's quieter bars. There he would sit in the plastic oak-beamed pub, the Happy Astro, nursing a small beer, grimly trying to be light-hearted and totally relaxed. 2 small beers and 3 hours of stomach-knotting relaxation later, he would go back to his bunk and spend half the night awake, praying to a god he didn't believe in for a miracle that couldn't happen. 2 days to go, and ravaged by the combination of anxiety, nicotine, caffeine tablets, alcohol he wasn't used to, dog-worming pills, and overall exhaustion, he would sleep in till mid-afternoon. After a long scream, he would rationalize that the day was a total write-off, and the rest of the afternoon would be spent shopping for the 3 best alarm clocks money could buy. This would often take 5 or 6 hours, and he would arrive back at his sleeping quarters, exhausted, but knowing he was fully prepared for his final day's revision before his exam. Waking at 4:30 in the morning, exercising, showering, and breakfasting, he would then sit down to prepare a final revision timetable, which would condense 3 months of revision into 12 short hours. This done, he would give up and go back to bed. Maybe he didn't know a single thing about astronavigation, but at least he'd be fresh for the exam the next day. Which is why Rimmer failed exams. Which is why he'd received 10 Fs for fail and 2 Xs for unclassified. The first X he'd achieved when he'd actually managed to get hold of some real amphetamines, gone into a spasm, and collapsed 2 minutes into the exam. And the second, when anxiety got so much the better of him, his subconscious forced him to deny his own existence, and he'd written, "I am a fish," 500 times on every single answer sheet. He'd even gone out for extra paper. What was more shocking than anything was that he thought he'd done quite well. Well, this time it was going to be different, he thought, as he sat carefully colouring all the quantum mechanics revision periods in diagonal lines of Prussian blue on a yellow ochre background, while Lister stared out of the viewport window. Peterson clomped noisily into the room and did his traditional parody of the full double-rimmer salute, which ended with him slapping his face several times and throwing himself onto the floor. The first time Lister had seen it, it was funny. This was the 252nd time, and it was beginning to lose its appeal. Lister and Peterson left and went down to the Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar for the 134th time. Only this time, Lister did something incredibly stupid. He fell in love. Hopelessly and helplessly in love. Third Console Officer Christine Kochanski had a face. That was the first thing Lister noticed about her. It wasn't a beautiful face, but it was a nice face. It wasn't a face that could launch 1,000 ships, maybe 2 ships in a small yacht. That was until she smiled. When she smiled, her eyes lit up like a pinball machine when you win a bonus game, and she smiled a lot. Lister could have perhaps survived the smile, but it was when he found the smile was attached to a sense of humour that he became irretrievably lost. They were both standing at the bar, queuing to get a drink, and Lister was looking at her in a not-looking-at-her kind of way. In the bar mirror, in the reflection in his beer glass, over his shoulder, pretending to look at Peterson, at the ceiling just above her head, and occasionally, because it was permitted, directly at her. His heart sank when a tanned, white-uniformed officer, who obviously knew her, came up and touched her on the shoulder. Touched her on the shoulder. Just like she was some kind of ordinary person. It really made Lister mad. The tanned, white-uniformed officer noticed a book sticking out of her black jacket pocket. Lister had noticed it too. It was called Learn Japanese by Dr. P. Brewis.
Learn Japanese? The officer snorted. Talk about pretentious.
What she said next tipped Lister over the edge. Pretentious? She placed her palm on her chest. Watashi? Lister didn't know any Japanese, but he guessed rightly that it was a switch on the pretentious, moi, joke. The officer just looked at her blankly. She got her drinks and went back to her seat, while Lister was still trying to think of something to say which would start a conversation. For the next hour, Peterson droned on about the supply station at the Iranian moon Miranda, where Red Dwarf was due to stop off for supplies in 7 weeks. It was to be their only shore leave between Saturn and Triton, and Peterson was telling him what a great time they were going to have. But Lister wasn't listening. He was looking across the crowded cocktail bar, trying to calculate the amount of drink left in the glasses of the girl with the pinball smile and her female companion, so he could be at the bar just as she arrived and casually offer to buy her a drink. Who was he kidding? How do you casually offer to buy someone a drink without making it sound like, I want you to have my babies? If he hadn't been crazy about her, it wouldn't have been a problem. Lister never had any trouble asking women for a date, provided he wasn't too keen on them. When he was, which didn't happen too often, he had all the charm, wit, and self-possession of an Alsatian dog after a head swap operation. She got up to go to the bar. Lister got up too. They exchanged smiles, ordered drinks, and went back to their separate tables. Damn! Smeg! Blew it! She got up again.
My round,
said Peterson, rising. Lister thrust him back in his chair and went to the bar. They exchanged smiles, and highs this time, ordered their drinks, and went back to their separate tables. Damn! Smeg! Blew it again! She'd hardly sat down before she was getting up again. The 2 girls' glasses were full.
She's going for peanuts, thought Lister. You want some peanuts? He asked Peterson.
No thanks.
I'll go and get some. They stood at the bar again. They exchanged smiles again. Then she introduced herself and asked him out for a date. And so it began. Lister became a walking cliché. His senses were heightened, so even the foul, recycled air of the ship tasted crisp and spring-like. He went off his food. He stopped drinking. Pop lyrics started to mean something to him. Magically, he became better looking. He'd heard that this happened, but he'd never really believed it. He got out of bed before his alarm clock went off, unheard of. He started to marvel at the view out of the viewport window. And his face acquired 3 new expressions. 3 expressions which he'd stolen from her. 3 expressions which on her he found adorable. He wasn't aware of even copying them, and he certainly wasn't aware how stupid he looked when he pulled them. And even if he had been aware, he wouldn't have cared, because 3rd Console Officer Christine Kachansky, also known as Babes, also known as Ange, short for Angel, also known as Chrissy, also known as KK, Sweet Pea, and a host of other too nauseating to recount, was madly, electrically in love with him. Lister's all-time favourite movie was Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, and just to make things totally perfect, it happened to be Kachansky's too. They sat in bed. Kachansky's bunkmate Barbara had been chased away to the ship's cinema yet again, eating hot dogs, doused in mustard and watching for the 3rd consecutive night It's a Wonderful Life on Kachansky's sleeping quarters vidscreen. Suddenly, in the middle of the scene where Jimmy Stewart's father dies, Lister found himself for the first time in his life talking about his own father's death. It wasn't, of course, his real father, but he was only 6 at the time, and he didn't know then that he'd been adopted. It had been a gloriously hot day in midsummer, and the 6-year-old Lister was given toys and presents by everyone. It was better than Christmas. He remembered wishing at the time a few more people would die so he could complete his Lego set. She held his hand and listened. Me grandmother tried to explain. She said he'd gone away and he wasn't coming back. So I wanted to know where. She told me he was very happy, and he'd gone to the same place as my goldfish. Lister toyed absently with his plaited locks. I thought they'd flushed him down the bog. I used to stand with me head down the loo and talk to him. I thought he was just round the U-bend. In the end, they had to take me to a child psychologist, because they found me with me head down the pan reading him the football scores. This had never struck Lister as being funny, but when Kachansky started roaring with laughter, he started laughing too. It was like a geyser going off. Something was exorcised. And as they lay in the crumb-laden sheets wrapped in each other's arms, giggling like idiots, and even though they'd only been dating for 3.5 short weeks, Lister knew more certainly than he'd ever known anything in his life before that they'd be together forever.